Flight 19 was the designation of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5, 1945 during a United States Navy overwater navigation training flight from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida. All 14 airmen on the flight were lost, as were all 13 crew members of a PBM Mariner flying boat assumed by professional investigators to have exploded in mid-air while searching for the flight. Navy investigators could not determine the cause of the loss of Flight 19 but said the airmen may have become disoriented and ditched in rough seas after running out of fuel. PBM 5, earlier, as it became obvious the flight was indeed lost, several air bases, aircraft, and merchant ships were alerted. A PBY Catalina left after 1800 to search for Flight 19 and guide them back if they could be located. After dark, 2 PBM Mariner seaplanes originally scheduled for their own training flights were diverted to perform square pattern searches in the area west of 29° N 79° W. PBM 5 59225 took off at 1927 from Banana River Naval Air Station, called in a routine radio message at 1930 and was never heard from again. At 21.15, the tanker SS Gaines Mills reported it had observed flames from an apparent explosion leaping 100 ft high and burning for 10 minutes, at position 28.59° N 80.25° W/28.59. -80.25. Captain Shunner Stanley reported unsuccessfully searching for survivors through a pool of oil. The escort carrier Ussa Solomons also reported losing radar contact with an aircraft at the same position and time. Investigation. A 500-page Navy Board of Investigation report published a few months later made several observations. Taylor had mistakenly believed that the small islands he passed over were the Florida Keys, so his flight was over the Gulf of Mexico and heading northeast would take them to Florida. It was determined that Taylor had passed over the Bahamas as scheduled, and he did in fact lead his flight to the northeast over the Atlantic. The report noted that some subordinate officers did likely know their approximate position as indicated by radio transmissions stating that flying west would result in reaching the mainland. Taylor, although an excellent combat pilot and officer with the Navy, had a tendency to fly by the seat of his pants, getting lost several times in the process. It was twice during such times that he had to ditch his plane in the Pacific and be rescued. But this time he would be confused about what happened to him. Taylor was not to fault because the compasses stopped working. The loss of PBM 5 59225 was attributed to an explosion. This report was subsequently amended cause unknown by the Navy after Taylor's mother contended that the Navy was unfairly blaming her son for the loss of 5 aircraft and 14 men, when the Navy had neither the bodies nor the airplanes as evidence. Had Flight 19 actually been where Taylor believed it to be, landfall with the Florida coastline would have been reached in a matter of 10 to 20 minutes or less, depending on how far down they were. However, a later reconstruction of the incident showed that the islands visible to Taylor were probably the Bahamas, well northeast of the Keys, and that Flight 19 was exactly where it should have been. The Board of Investigation found that because of his belief that he was on a base course toward Florida, Taylor actually guided the flight farther northeast and out to sea. Further, it was general knowledge at NAS Fort Lauderdale that if a pilot ever became lost in the area to fly a heading of 270° west. By the time the flight actually turned west, they were likely so far out to sea they had already passed their aircraft's fuel endurance. This factor combined with bad weather, and the ditching characteristics of the Avenger, meant that there was little hope of rescue, even if they had managed to stay afloat. It is possible that Taylor overshot Castaway Cay and instead reached another landmass in southern Abaco Island. He then proceeded northwest as planned. He fully expected to find the Grand Bahama Island lying in front of him as planned. Instead, he eventually saw a landmass to his right side, the northern part of Abaco Island. Believing that this landmass to his right was the Grand Bahama Island and his compass was malfunctioning, he set a course to what he thought was southwest to head straight back to Fort Lauderdale. However, in reality this changed his course farther northwest, toward open ocean. To further add to his confusion, he encountered a series of islands north of Abaco Island, which looks very similar to the Key West Islands, but he was still over the ocean instead of over Fort Lauderdale. The control tower then suggested that Taylor's team should fly west, which would have taken them to the landmass of Florida eventually. Taylor headed for what he thought was west, but in reality was northwest, almost parallel to Florida. After trying that for a while and no land in sight, Taylor decided that it was impossible for them to fly so far west and not reach Florida. He believed that he might have been near the Key West Islands. What followed was a series of serious confusions between Taylor, his team and the control tower. Taylor was not sure whether he was near Bahama or Key West, and he was not sure which direction was which due to compass malfunction. The control tower informed Taylor that he could not be in Key West since the wind that day did not blow that way. Some of his teammates believed that their compass was working. Taylor then set a course northeast according to their compass, which should take them to Florida if they were in Key West. When that failed, Taylor set a course west according to their compass, which should take them to Florida if they were in Bahama. If Taylor stayed this course he would have reached land before running out of fuel. However, at some point Taylor decided that he had tried going west enough. He then once again set a course northeast, thinking they were near Key West after all. Finally, his flight ran out of fuel and may have crashed into the ocean somewhere north of Abaco Island and east of Florida. Unrelated Avenger wreckage. In 1986, the wreckage of an Avenger was found off the Florida coast during the search for the wreckage of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Aviation archaeologist John Muir raised this wreck from the ocean floor in 1990. He mistakenly believed it was one of the missing planes. In 1991, a treasure hunting expedition led by Graham Hawkes announced that the wreckage of 5 Avengers had been discovered off the coast of Florida, but that tail numbers revealed they were not Flight 19. In 2004 a BBC documentary showed Hawkes returning with a new submersible 12 years later and identifying one of the planes by its bureau number as a flight lost at sea on October 9, 1943, over 2 years before Flight 19, but he was unable to definitively identify the other planes. The documentary concluded that despite the odds, they are just a random collection of accidents that came to rest in the same place 12 miles from home. But in March 2012 Hawkes was reported as stating that it had suited both him and the Pentagon to make the story go away because it was an expensive and time-consuming distraction, and that, while admitting he had found no conclusive evidence, he now thought he had in fact found Flight 19. Records showed training accidents between 1942 and 1945 accounted for the loss of 95 aviation personnel from NAS Fort Lauderdale, Indiana, 1992. Another expedition located scattered debris on the ocean floor, but nothing could be identified. In the last decade, searchers have been expanding their area to include farther east, into the Atlantic Ocean, but the remains of Flight 19 have still never been confirmed found. Crews of Flight 19 and PBM 5B No. 59225, Charles Carroll Taylor, the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, graduated from Naval Air Station Corpus Christi in February 1942 and became a flight instructor in October of that year. References. External links: The Loss of Flight 19 by the Navy History and Heritage Command, The Mystery of Flight 19 by Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale Museum, The Lost Patroller 1982 flight article.